and stuff, and I'm not a lawyer, but I'm just saying I could see.
It's just the contrast between the treatment is so stark. And I'm not a lawyer. Well, you know, another thing that I'm not a lawyer. Unfortunately, I have had a lot of time
in a space that you know nothing about, because I'm not a lawyer. Okay, so maybe I've written the lawsuit incorrectly. You know, I'm not a lawyer, and it's common. People know that I'm not a lawyer, but I do follow law news. That is their defense. A lot of people, I'm not a lawyer, so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he knows something.
I never have thought about this because, again, I'm not a lawyer, but
thing about this that's incorrect. That's because I'm not a lawyer, and I attempted a Rule 11 sanction motion against him, but because I'm not a lawyer and don't know, so there was something weird about this, and again, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so that could be the stupidest thing ever, and I wouldn't know. Take it as legal advice because I'm not a lawyer for mistrial based upon, but I'm not a lawyer, so I didn't know. So I'm not a lawyer either, but I have learned that ex parte communication is when...
I'm not a lawyer, as people know, but there's so many holes.
No, remember, I'm not a lawyer, so anything I say could easily be wrong. Yeah, I'm definitely not a lawyer. What? Oh, I keep bumping that thing. I mean, again, I'm not a lawyer.
He's taking this trial, as I understand it, again, I'm not a lawyer.
I mean, again, I'm not a lawyer.
I mean, this has to be...
Too. Don't forget, I'm not a lawyer. 60B4. Now remember, Rule 60, I'm not a lawyer. Yeah, it's strange because you see what I think should have happened, and again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. Treason? I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. My assessments of these... I'm not an accountant. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a forensic financial investigator. That's a lawyer. So I guess he's not a lawyer. I see these people in Congress, I think they're all lawyers. It could be wrong, because I'm not a... If the lawsuit works, and by works I mean it's complicated, and I'm not a lawyer. Now, it's also important for people to understand. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not the cops. I'm the law. I'm not a lawyer, but there's certain things that you should not do, I told him I'm not a lawyer and I can't help you, but we did get into an interesting conversation, and I'm not a lawyer, so it's very bad. And remember, I'm not a lawyer. Like when you're not a lawyer, now it's important for everybody to remember that I am not me because I'm not a lawyer. Understand how this meets the elements of fraud in New York, but I'm not a lawyer. Perhaps, right? A lawyer, I believe, and it's important to remember, I'm not a lawyer. Nothing I ever say is legal advice. Nobody should take any legal advice from me. I'm not qualified. Forgive me, I'm not a lawyer. Take a break from being a counter lawfare specialist. I'm not a lawyer, or anything. I am not a lawyer. I'm definitely not a lawyer.
Such bias, you know, and I'm not a lawyer, but such bias at every turn against the Trumps. And
statute, and for our audience, I'm not a lawyer, and this isn't legal advice.
It's just elementary stuff, and I'm not a lawyer, but it's elementary when you. I'm not a lawyer, but I think there are all sorts of these, and again, I'm not a lawyer. And we also know that the indictment, when it was written at the time, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I've seen a lot of legal documents.
I'm not a lawyer, but they're doing complicated. It's important for people to remember that I'm not a lawyer, and that I'm not. I know I'm not a lawyer. I was surprised to see that stocks were, I don't understand why. And this is, you know, I'm not a lawyer. I mean, I am not a lawyer. Bring a key tam lawsuit in the right circumstance, a key tam lawsuit, and I'm not a lawyer. This has been years, but I've realized, even though I'm not a lawyer, and if, like me, you're not a lawyer.
To me, if you're, again, I'm not a political type, and I'm not a lawyer. The Bann memo, Hillary Clinton, Kessel's not a lawyer, he's just a liar.
Now, and it's interesting too, because, you know, I'm not a lawyer. I am not a lawyer. I'm used. I mean, again, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a lawyer. So he's obviously, he's not a lawyer. The part comes in is that while I'm not.
And so when they realized they couldn't outsmart him that way, they said, okay, you're not a lawyer.
I'm not a lawyer, so anything I ever say, as far as I can read the law, and again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a lawyer, and there's huge aspects of law and procedural stuff that I have to say. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not qualified to tell anyone to do anything other than become this. And I think, I'm not a lawyer, so this could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure none of it is legal advice, and I'm not a lawyer. Didn't do. He was saying things like, well, I'm not a lawyer, and state, again, I'm not a lawyer, so nothing I ever say is, but so he's got it registered to this P.O. box, which I'm advice because I'm not a lawyer, but this is what I observe from listening to lawyers and looking at, and it was printed in the New York Times. By the way, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal matter.
Right, and so, again, I'm not a lawyer.
Again, Laura's not a lawyer. Procedure. And by the way, this could be totally wrong. I'm not a lawyer. Hope that, look, I'm not a lawyer, Charles, so anything could go wrong with it. And because I'm not a lawyer, and I was not familiar with the ruling guy, he's not a lawyer either, but he has been involved of it because I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not qualified to give anybody legal advice.
He's not a lawyer. He's a political operative who is found in contempt of
lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and that's not legal advice. And again, I'm not a lawyer, so this isn't legal advice. Here's another thing that I'm not a lawyer and not giving legal advice about, but just happen to do that. But again, I'm not a lawyer. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so maybe that's a bad example.
And I'm not a lawyer, and I'm certainly not good at drafting documents. Even
to misrepresent anything. I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
You're not a lawyer. I don't have any kind of more thoroughly, but again, I'm not a lawyer. I read it, but I'm not a lawyer. With a lawsuit, and by the way, that's not legal advice. I'm not a lawyer.
well, I am not a lawyer, and I know you're not a lawyer either. But
Now, by the way, I'm not a lawyer. Nothing I talk about is ever legal advice. Nobody. And I'm not a lawyer, but you have just raised what I think is Harry Potter. Nothing I ever say is legal advice, and I am not a lawyer. But unless you're a lawyer, you cannot represent a corporate entity, and I am not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. Remember, nothing so much about the law. It's important for people to remember that I'm not a lawyer. And I'm not a lawyer. Remember, I'm not a lawyer. Nothing I'm telling you is legal advice. It's not intended to be an error. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just sharing my experiences. By the way, people who watch the show regularly know I'm not a lawyer. Doctor, he's not a lawyer, but he started his own pro se believe that it could be criminal, but I'm not a lawyer. Certainly, I'm not a lawyer, and nothing we're discussing here is legal advice. You've just informed me that you're not a lawyer. Write the claims properly, and I'm certainly not a lawyer. But it doesn't seem justified.
I'm not a lawyer, but there's a theory that it was elegant of him to do what he did.
Guys might be screwed if the case survives. I'm not a lawyer. No legal training. And I barely have any idea what I'm doing. I'm not a lawyer. Nothing I ever say is legal. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not a lawyer. Criminals. I'm speaking hyperbolically because I'm not a lawyer, and I sometimes might use something else. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so don't take any legal action based on that. Lawyers are going to know better than me. I'm not a lawyer. But there's something very tricky going on about things that are happening in the public domain. It's not legal advice. Now it's become a very complicated mess to unwind, and because I'm not a lawyer, there's this trail.
Ourselves. And again, I'm not a lawyer. I think that's a big stretch for the way I read it. And I'm not a lawyer.
I'm not a lawyer. When you're not a lawyer, that can screw you up. This is very confusing. I am not a lawyer, remember. First of all, the only one there who's not a lawyer is Raw.
I'm not a lawyer, but reading what people have written, there's some profound issues.
But that's not true. The reason I am repeatedly bringing lawsuits is because I'm not a lawyer, and in many regards I still don't know what, because remember, I'm not a lawyer. And nothing I ever say is legal advice or intended to be intended before. I am not a lawyer. Great idea, I guess. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not sure. And again, I mean, I am not a lawyer. No, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not the cops, but I think somebody needs to take a certain recommendation from Goodman v. Boozy. It's important that people remember I'm not a lawyer and am not a lawyer at all. Thinking, well, I'm not a lawyer and Ron Coleman is, so he must know something that I don't know. That's just stupid. How could you do that? I did that because I didn't know, and I'm not allowed. This is not a good way to learn about it because I'm not a lawyer, but what I was told by the judge, the interview with Jason Fike, where he was telling us all about CDA 230, he's not a lawyer, but people to understand exactly what's going on in the way that I understand it. And again, I'm not a lawyer. Nothing I ever say is legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know why Charles doesn't to do. I'm not a lawyer. I've said it many times. Nothing I ever say is legal advice. Put on shorts and run around. That's about all I know about it. So I'm not a lawyer. I'm not what, nothing's ever going to work. I'm giving up. I'm not a lawyer anymore. Documents. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say definitively what this means, but I feel like this is not this. Now, people have heard of attorney-client privilege, and what that is, again, I'm not a lawyer. A lawyer probably would tell me, don't yell at people on the High Line. I'm not a lawyer.
Well, it's tough to incorporate something if you're not a lawyer. Not a lawyer. I'm a conspirator.
Right.
And as lawyers I know have been briefing me, and I'm not
I don't understand. I'm not a lawyer. Remember, I'm not a lawyer, but you own this company, and nothing I'm saying is legal advice.
It seems clear to me, and again, I'm not a lawyer, it seems clear to me that
I don't see any, and I'm not a lawyer, but I can't find a portion of this agreement that goes through
lawyers who know what they're doing, and I'm not a lawyer. And when it comes to law stuff that I know now, and I'm not a lawyer, but I know more about the law than I did when all this started. Against Giuliani and One American News Network, they're doing things. Listen, I'm not a lawyer. It's important that viewers know that I'm not a lawyer, even though I'm filing. And again, I'm not a lawyer, so this could still be wrong.